Ethan, an 8-year-old boy with a sharp sense of right and wrong, has always been the protector in his small family, especially after his mother's passing 2 years ago. His world revolved around his father, David, and their close-knit bond. But everything changed when Emily entered their lives. It was supposed to be the happiest day of David's life, a wedding filled with joy, love, and excitement. Instead, it became the day that Ethan would make a decision that would shake everything to its core. Ethan had known for a while that something wasn't right. His father seemed happy, but Ethan could see the cracks behind Emily's polished exterior. He could feel it, the tension, the coldness in her smile when no one else was looking, the way she made him feel like an inconvenience in his own home. And so, the night before the wedding, as he lay in bed, tossing and turning, the decision became clear. He couldn't stay silent any longer. Ethan wasn't just a child. He was a protector, a truth-bearer. He had to expose Emily for what she really was, no matter the cost. He couldn't stand by and watch his father marry someone who didn't deserve him. But could a child's voice be enough to stop something as big as a wedding? Ethan didn't know, but he had to try. The chapel was bathed in sunlight as the guests eagerly awaited the start of the ceremony. There was a hum of excitement in the air as family and friends whispered, exchanging smiles and stories. Everyone's attention was fixed on the bride. But for Ethan, all he could focus on was his father, David. David, tall and proud in his tuxedo, stood at the altar, a nervous smile on his face, his eyes scanning the crowd. He looked every bit the man who had fallen in love, and yet, there was something in his eyes that betrayed his calm exterior. Ethan could see it. His dad's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "You look great, Dad," Ethan whispered, his voice trembling slightly as he clutched the small pillow holding the rings. His heart was pounding. His palms were sweaty. His small body was shaking, but he forced a smile, hoping it would reassure David. David glanced down, smiling at his son. "Thanks, buddy. You're the best ring-bearer a dad could ask for." He ruffled Ethan's hair affectionately, oblivious to the storm raging inside the boy. Ethan's eyes flickered nervously from his father's smile to Emily's spot at the back of the chapel, where she would soon appear. As the first notes of the wedding march filled the air, the congregation rose to their feet in anticipation. All eyes turned toward the chapel doors, but Ethan couldn't look away from his father. The man who had stood by him all his life was about to make a decision that might change everything. The doors swung open, and there stood Emily, graceful, radiant, with her golden hair cascading down her shoulders like a waterfall. She was everything a bride should be, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Emily's blue eyes sparkled with what appeared to be emotion, but to Ethan, they seemed cold, distant. David's face lit up as he saw Emily, his lips forming a perfect smile. "You look beautiful," he whispered, his voice thick with adoration. But Ethan could barely hear his father's words, his mind racing. His instincts were screaming at him, urging him to act before it was too late. Ethan's gaze remained fixed on Emily, his heart hammering in his chest. He couldn't explain it, but something about the way she walked toward his father, the way her eyes locked on him, sent a chill through Ethan's entire body. This was the moment. This was the day everything changed. As the ceremony continued, Ethan's eyes darted back and forth between Emily and his father. He could feel the weight of the moment. The wedding was happening, but he knew he couldn't let it go on any longer. His fear was not just about losing his father to someone he didn't trust. It was about the darker secret that Emily was hiding. Ethan had seen it, heard it. Emily was not who she appeared to be. Ethan had never been fond of change. Since his mother's passing, it had been just him and his father, and that had always felt like enough. But when Emily entered their lives, everything shifted. David seemed so happy, so hopeful, and Ethan could see the love in his eyes whenever he looked at her. But that didn't mean Emily was right for him or for them. Their first meeting had been months ago, on a cool autumn afternoon. David had picked Ethan up from school, his face practically glowing with excitement. "I've got someone special I want you to meet, buddy," he had said, practically bouncing in his seat as they drove home. Ethan had felt a knot twist in his stomach. When they arrived, Emily was standing on the porch. Her golden hair shone in the sunlight, and she wore a warm, welcoming smile. Ethan didn't know what to expect, but something in his gut told him that this wasn't just an ordinary woman. His dad was clearly smitten, and that made Ethan uneasy. "Hi, Ethan," she had said, kneeling to his level with a smile that felt just a little too practiced. "I've heard so much about you." Ethan, ever the curious child, had tried to engage her in conversation. "Do you like space? We're learning about the solar system in school." But instead of the warm response he was hoping for, Emily had sharply cut him off, her eyes glued to her phone. "I'm busy right now. Eat your dinner quietly, please." Ethan had sat in stunned silence, the words hanging in the air like a heavy weight. He pushed his food around his plate, the silence between them deafening. His father, however, didn't seem to notice. When David was home, Emily would laugh at Ethan's jokes, ask about his school, and even play games with him. But when David wasn't around, things changed. It wasn't long before Ethan began to feel like an afterthought in his own home. The warmth and attention he once received from his father had been replaced with Emily's cold indifference. It was as though she were trying to force him out of the picture. But what hurt the most was the way she subtly undermined him. Her comments, masked as helpful advice, chipped away at his self-esteem. "You can do better than that, Ethan," she'd say when he made a small mistake, or, "I think you should try harder." Ethan began to withdraw, spending more and more time in his room, away from the tension. He didn't want to be around her. But the more he retreated, the more his father seemed to pull away too. David couldn't see the real Emily. All he saw was the woman he was falling in love with. Ethan's growing unease reached its peak one Saturday afternoon, just 3 months before the wedding. David had gone out for errands, leaving Ethan and Emily alone in the house. As Ethan sat in the living room watching cartoons, he overheard something that would haunt him forever. He was rubbing his arm, where Emily had grabbed him earlier, feeling a strange chill settle in his chest when he heard Emily's voice from the other room. She was on the phone, talking to someone named Mark. Ethan couldn't make out the words at first, but then he heard enough to freeze him in place. "Yeah, it's all under control. Once the wedding is done, we move on to phase 2. The insurance policy. David won't suspect a thing." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. Insurance policy. Phase 2? The words felt like daggers in his mind. What was she planning? Why would she need a policy on his dad's life? He tried to shake the thoughts away, but they stuck with him. The conversation replayed over and over in his mind, like a broken record. Whatever Emily was planning, it was bad. It was dangerous, and it was happening right under David's nose. Ethan had to find a way to stop it. But how? Who would believe a child over an adult like Emily? The weight of the truth pressed heavily on his shoulders as he watched his father laugh with Emily, never knowing what was lurking just beneath the surface. As the days passed, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong with Emily. His fears deepened with each passing day, and his attempts to get his father to see the truth became more desperate. He didn't know why Emily's words had disturbed him so much. After all, she had sounded so sweet when she was around David. But Ethan's gut told him that this wasn't about sweetness. This was about control. It wasn't just the phone call that bothered him. It was the little things, the subtle moments that no one else seemed to notice. The way Emily would talk down to him, belittle him without even realizing it. Or maybe she did realize it. Maybe she enjoyed it. When David wasn't around, Emily's true nature revealed itself. She would make cruel, offhand comments, and Ethan could feel the weight of them. He wasn't a child who craved attention for attention's sake. He just wanted to feel loved and accepted. But with Emily, he was constantly reminded that he was less than her perfect image of what a family should be. One evening, just a few weeks before the wedding, Ethan found himself alone with Emily again. David had been out, and the house was eerily quiet. Ethan, who had been avoiding her as much as possible, was in the kitchen, trying to distract himself with homework. But Emily entered the room, her heels clicking sharply against the tile floor. "How's school going, Ethan?" she asked, her tone sweet, almost too sweet. Ethan glanced up from his math homework, unsure of how to respond. "Good," he muttered, turning his gaze back to the book in front of him. But Emily wasn't done. She moved closer, standing over him like a shadow. "You know, David is really busy with work. You should be more understanding." Ethan frowned. "I am," he said quietly, but the words didn't seem to satisfy her. "Well," Emily continued, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "it wouldn't hurt if you tried a little harder to be, well, perfect." The words stung, and Ethan felt his chest tighten. He didn't know what Emily expected from him. He was just a kid. But every day it seemed like the bar kept getting higher, and he kept falling short. As the wedding approached, Ethan began to notice more disturbing signs of Emily's control over his father. David had started to change too. He was more distant, less attentive. Emily was always in the background, pulling the strings, making suggestions about everything, from what David wore to how he spent his time. And David, for all his love, was blind to it. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Emily casually mentioned something that made Ethan's stomach churn. "You know," Emily said, her voice light, "we should really think about increasing David's life insurance policy. You never know what could happen." Ethan's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. The words hung in the air, a dreadful weight pressing down on him. Emily had been talking about life insurance before, but now it was clear she had a plan. And that plan didn't involve love. Ethan knew he had to act quickly. The closer the wedding got, the more desperate his father became to make it perfect. The more Emily pulled the strings. Ethan wasn't sure what Emily was planning, but he knew it wasn't good. The question now was, how could he get his father to listen before it was too late? There was only so much time left before the wedding. Ethan knew that if he didn't stop it now, his father's life, and possibly his own, would be in danger. But how could he make David believe him? How could he make anyone believe him? Ethan's suspicions about Emily had been growing, but one fateful afternoon, his worst fears were confirmed. It happened when David went out to run errands, leaving Ethan alone with Emily once again. Ethan had learned to avoid her, but that day, he couldn't shake the need to investigate. Something inside him pushed him to act. As he sat in the living room, pretending to focus on his homework, he heard the soft click of Emily's heels against the wooden floor. She was pacing, speaking in hushed tones as she made a phone call. Ethan, unable to resist, crept closer, crouching behind the couch to listen. "Yeah, we're getting closer to the wedding. Once it's done, we can move on to the next phase. The insurance policy's in place. David won't suspect a thing." Ethan's heart stopped. The words hit him like a ton of bricks. Emily had been planning something all along. An insurance policy. What did that even mean? His mind raced with confusion, but one thing became clear. Emily's motives were not pure. Once David's out of the picture, everything will fall into place. "I'll make sure it looks like an accident," Emily continued. "And then we'll take the money and run." The realization hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. She was planning to kill his father. All the smiles, the fake kindness, it had all been a facade. Ethan couldn't believe it. His father's life was at risk, and Emily was the one behind it. Ethan's hands trembled as he tried to process the information. He had overheard enough to understand that Emily wasn't just a cold-hearted person. She was dangerous. She had a plan, and it involved taking everything from David. But worse, it involved taking his life. As the conversation ended, Ethan remained frozen, struggling to catch his breath. His mind was spinning. He had to stop this. He had to tell his father. But would David believe him? How could he convince his dad that the woman he loved was plotting his death? Ethan felt small, insignificant in the face of this monstrous plan. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Ethan lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with images of Emily and the man named Mark, the mysterious figure who seemed to be her partner in crime. He couldn't shake the image of them laughing over something, their faces twisted with malice. What were they planning? How could they be stopped? Ethan had always believed in justice, But this was different. This wasn't just a matter of right or wrong. This was a matter of life and death. He knew he couldn't do it alone. He had to find a way to expose Emily's plan, to make sure his father understood the danger before it was too late. But how? The wedding was only days away. The pressure was mounting. Emily's plan was already in motion, and David had no idea. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he realized that the clock was ticking. If he didn't act now, it might be too late for them both. The days leading up to the wedding were an agonizing blur for Ethan. Each passing moment felt like a race against time, and his fear grew with every second. Emily's plan was coming together, and yet David remained oblivious, too caught up in his love for her to see the monster hiding behind the veil of charm. Ethan's mind was clouded with doubt. He knew he had to tell his father the truth. But how could he? David adored Emily, and Ethan had already witnessed how easy it was for her to manipulate him. How could a child like him, one with no real proof, convince a grown man that the woman he loved was plotting to kill him? Ethan tried to summon the courage to speak, to warn his father, but the words never came. Every time he tried to open his mouth, something held him back. What if David didn't believe him? What if he thought Ethan was just being jealous or overly protective? And what if Emily made things worse? One night, about a week before the wedding, Ethan finally decided to take action. He had spent days trying to find a way to tell David, but it wasn't working. His father was too lost in his own world, too blinded by love to see the truth. David had been working late, and Ethan knew this was his chance. He waited until the house was quiet, then tiptoed to the study where his father was sitting, hunched over papers, lost in thought. "Dad!" Ethan's voice was barely a whisper, but David looked up immediately, his face softening as he noticed his son standing in the doorway. "Hey, buddy," David said, his voice warm and reassuring. "What's going on?" Ethan swallowed hard. "I need to talk to you. It's important." David smiled gently, clearly distracted. "What is it, son? You can always talk to me." But Ethan hesitated. How could he say what he needed to? How could he explain the things he had overheard? The way Emily's smile made his skin crawl, the way she had treated him. He had tried to tell himself that maybe he was just being paranoid, but deep down, he knew that this wasn't just about hurt feelings or jealousy. It was about survival. "Dad," Ethan started again, his voice trembling. "I know you love Emily, but she's not who you think she is." David's expression softened, but there was a slight chuckle in his voice. "Ethan, you're just nervous about the wedding. I get it, but you have to trust me. Emily's a good person. I know she's not perfect, but she's trying her best." Ethan felt his stomach twist. "No, Dad, you don't understand. She's not trying her best. She's planning something bad. You're in danger." David's brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you talking about, son? Emily loves you. She wouldn't hurt you." Ethan clenched his fists, fighting back tears. How could he make his father understand? He had no evidence, just the haunting memory of the conversations he'd overheard, the way Emily had manipulated David into trusting her, the coldness in her eyes. How could he convince David that the woman he was about to marry was capable of so much more than just hurting him? "I overheard her, Dad. She was talking to someone, Mark, and they're planning something awful. She was talking about life insurance and she said once the wedding's over, we move on to phase 2. She said it like it was a plan." David stood up, his face a mask of disbelief. "Ethan, this is crazy. What you're saying doesn't make sense." "I know it sounds crazy," Ethan said, his voice cracking, "but it's true. I saw the policy on her computer. I know what she's planning." David's expression shifted. There was a flash of something in his eyes, something close to realization. But then, just as quickly, it faded. "I don't know what to think right now," he muttered. "I need to process this. Maybe you're just overreacting." Ethan's heart sank. His worst fear had come true. David didn't believe him, but he couldn't give up, not now. "I'm not lying, Dad," Ethan said, his voice desperate. "Please, I know this sounds crazy, but I'm telling you the truth. You have to believe me." David placed a hand on his son's shoulder, the warmth of his touch only adding to Ethan's growing sense of hopelessness. "I know you're scared, buddy, but I can't just believe something without proof. I'll talk to Emily, okay? We'll figure this out." But Ethan knew. He knew deep down that David wouldn't listen, that he was too blinded by his love for Emily to see the danger lurking just beneath the surface. The wedding was only days away, and the clock was ticking. Ethan's heart was heavy with the knowledge that he couldn't stop it alone. As he lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, a new plan formed in Ethan's mind. He had to do something drastic. He had to make David see the truth before it was too late. But what? What could he do to make his father believe him? The wedding day was approaching fast, and every time Ethan looked at his father, his anxiety grew. He had tried to warn David, tried to show him the truth, but his words had fallen on deaf ears. Emily's charm continued to work its magic, and David remained utterly captivated by her. Every smile she gave him, every soft word, made him blind to the danger that Ethan saw so clearly. Ethan couldn't bear it anymore. He couldn't sit back and watch his father make the biggest mistake of his life. The wedding, meant to be a joyous occasion, now felt like a ticking time bomb, and Ethan was running out of time to stop it. The night before the wedding, Ethan was unable to sleep. He tossed and turned in bed, haunted by the images of Emily and Mark, the conversations he had overheard, and the dark plans he was sure were in motion. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind, made him jump, his heart racing with fear. He couldn't let his dad marry Emily, not when he knew what she was capable of. Ethan decided that he had no choice but to act. He needed proof. He needed something that would make David see the truth, something that would shake him out of his blind trust in Emily. He had to get into her personal things, into the files, the records, anything that might expose her. The plan was risky, but Ethan was desperate. He waited until David had gone to bed, exhausted from the wedding preparations. Emily, too, was in her room, getting ready for the big day. Ethan knew this was his moment. He crept quietly through the house, his heart pounding in his chest. Every step seemed to echo through the silent house. He made his way to Emily's room, where he had seen her leave her laptop earlier. Ethan hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering over the keyboard. What if he was caught? What if Emily found out what he was doing? But the thought of his father marrying Emily, of her taking everything from him, was too much to bear. He had to do this, no matter the cost. He opened the laptop, his hands shaking as he typed in the password he had seen Emily enter before. It was simple enough. As the screen lit up, Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He was in. The next few minutes felt like hours. Ethan clicked through file after file, desperately searching for anything that could expose Emily's true nature. It wasn't long before he found it. A document marked life insurance policy. His heart skipped a beat as he opened it. The policy was for millions of dollars, with David as the insured. But the more he read, the more he realized how twisted it was. If David were to die under suspicious circumstances, Emily would receive the full payout. The realization hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. She wasn't just after money. She was planning something much worse. The insurance policy was the key to her plot. Emily had every intention of getting rid of David. She had been setting him up all along. Suddenly, the front door creaked. Ethan froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He quickly closed the laptop and shoved it back onto the desk. He could hear footsteps in the hallway. Emily was coming. Ethan's mind raced. He had to get out of there before she found him. He quickly darted to the door, just as Emily's voice called out from the hallway. "Ethan?" Ethan's heart skipped a beat. His throat tightened with fear. He had to act fast. He threw open the door, pretending to be casual as he walked down the hallway, trying to act like he was just heading to the bathroom. "Hey, Emily?" Ethan said, trying to keep his voice steady, but the fear was evident. Emily looked at him suspiciously, her eyes narrowing. "What are you doing in here?" Ethan's mind raced, but he forced a smile. "Just couldn't sleep. Thought I'd grab a drink." Emily stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, with a sigh, She turned and walked back toward her room, muttering something under her breath. Ethan watched her disappear into her room, his heart still pounding. He had to get out of there before she came back. He bolted down the hallway, back to his room, and slammed the door behind him. The evidence was right there in his hands. He had it. The truth was undeniable. But the question was, what could he do with it? How could he convince his father? Emily was one step ahead of him and time was running out. Ethan knew he couldn't wait any longer. He had to act. The wedding was tomorrow, and he couldn't let Emily go through with it. His father's life was at stake. The morning of the wedding arrived, and everything was moving too fast. Ethan barely slept, his mind buzzing with fear and dread. He had the proof. He had seen the insurance policy, heard the conversations, and now, the most important day of his father's life was unfolding before his eyes. The guests were arriving, the decorations were set, and his father was getting ready to walk down the aisle. Yet, all Ethan could think about was stopping the wedding before it was too late. It felt surreal to be standing in the midst of the chaos, knowing what he knew. People were excited, happy, and oblivious to the danger lurking beneath the surface. The air was thick with anticipation, but for Ethan, it was suffocating. His heart raced as he watched David, his father, ready to pledge his life to Emily. Ethan had to do something. He couldn't let this happen. As the wedding preparations continued, Ethan could feel his resolve harden. His father was about to marry the woman who had been manipulating him for months, and Ethan couldn't stand by and watch it unfold. He had tried every way he knew to convince David, but it hadn't worked. This time, there was no turning back. He wasn't just going to let Emily walk down the aisle and complete her plan. Ethan knew what he had to do. He had to expose her in front of everyone, even if it meant shattering his father's heart. It was the only way to save him. Ethan's heart pounded as he stood in the back of the chapel, watching his father talk to the guests, beaming with joy as he awaited his bride. The first notes of the wedding march played softly in the background, and everyone's attention shifted to the door. Ethan's stomach churned as he saw Emily appear at the end of the aisle, looking every bit the perfect bride. She was beautiful, poised, and radiated a charm that seemed to draw everyone in. But to Ethan, she was nothing but a liar and a danger to his father's life. His hands shook as he clutched the ring pillow, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He could feel the eyes of the guests on him, but none of it mattered. David looked at Emily as she approached the altar, his face lighting up with love. He whispered something to her, but Ethan barely heard it. All he could focus on was the truth he was about to reveal. The moment had arrived. As Emily took her place beside David, Ethan stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper, but filled with urgency. "Dad, stop." The room fell silent. The soft murmur of the wedding march ceased, and all eyes turned toward Ethan, who stood at the front of the chapel. His chest tightened as the words left his mouth, but there was no turning back now. David looked at Ethan, his expression confused. "What is it, buddy?" he asked, but there was a faint hint of concern in his voice. Ethan swallowed hard, gathering the strength to speak. "She's not who you think she is. Emily, she's been lying to you. She's planning something bad. You're in danger." A ripple of shock passed through the crowd. Gasps filled the air, and whispers spread quickly. David's face shifted from confusion to disbelief. "Ethan, what are you talking about? You're just nervous. This is all just nerves." "No, Dad," Ethan said, his voice trembling but resolute. "I overheard her. She's been planning this. The wedding, the insurance policy. She's been manipulating you the whole time. She doesn't love you, she wants your money. She wants to kill you." David's face went pale. "What? No. That's impossible." Ethan's heart raced, but he pressed on. "I saw the insurance policy on her laptop. I heard her talking to someone named Mark. She wants you dead. She's gonna kill you, Dad. You can't marry her." David looked at Ethan, his expression a mixture of shock and pain. The reality of his son's words seemed to hit him slowly. This can't be true." Emily, standing beside David, was visibly shaken. her face flushed with anger, and for the first time, the facade she had so carefully constructed cracked. "This is ridiculous," she spat, her voice sharp. "Ethan, you don't know what you're talking about. You're just trying to ruin everything." But Ethan didn't back down. He stepped closer, his voice growing louder. "You're lying. I know what you've been planning. I heard everything." David turned to face Emily, his eyes searching hers for any trace of truth. "Emily, is this true?" he asked, his voice breaking. For a moment, Emily seemed to hesitate. The polished, fake warmth in her eyes was gone, replaced by coldness and fury. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. In that moment, David saw the truth. The woman he had loved, the woman he had trusted, was a stranger. "I can't believe this," he whispered, his voice shaking. "You've been lying to me this whole time." Tears welled in Ethan's eyes as he watched his father's heart break. The man who had always been his rock was standing in front of him, shattered by betrayal. But Ethan knew this was the only way. He had done the right thing, even if it hurt. The guests, still in shock, murmured among themselves. Some stood up, moving toward the exits, while others watched in stunned silence. The wedding was over before it had even begun. David turned to Ethan, his expression torn between disbelief and anger. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Ethan swallowed hard, tears streaming down his face. "I tried, Dad. I tried, but you wouldn't listen. I didn't want to ruin your life, but I couldn't let her hurt you." David pulled Ethan into an embrace, his arms shaking. "I'm so sorry, son. I should have believed you. I should have seen it." For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The truth had come out, and his father was safe. But the cost of that truth was still fresh and painful. As the chapel descended into chaos, the weight of Ethan's revelation hung heavily in the air. Emily, the woman David had planned to marry, stood frozen beside him, her perfect mask of composure now cracked. The guests were murmuring, some in disbelief, others in a mix of concern and curiosity. Ethan's heart raced as he looked at his father, unsure of what would come next. David's eyes were fixed on Emily, his mind struggling to process the truth his son had just exposed. Ethan could see the hurt, the betrayal, and the confusion on his father's face. He had always trusted Emily, had always believed that she was the one. But now, the truth was in front of him, and there was no denying it. David's voice was low, almost a whisper, but the emotion in it was undeniable. "Emily, what do you have to say for yourself?" For a moment, Emily didn't speak. Her eyes flickered from David to Ethan, and in that fleeting moment, Ethan saw something. Something cold, calculating, hidden beneath the polished facade. Emily's smile faltered, and the warmth in her eyes disappeared, replaced by a sharp, dangerous look. She finally spoke, her voice venomous. "This is a joke, right? You've been fed lies, David. Ethan doesn't know what he's talking about. He's just jealous. I've been nothing but kind to him. This is ridiculous." But David wasn't buying it. His face twisted with disgust, and he took a step back, as if physically distancing himself from the woman he had been so close to marrying. "I can't believe this. How could you do this to me?" Tears welled up in Ethan's eyes as he watched his father unravel. He had known this would be painful, but seeing David's heart break like this was something he hadn't prepared for. Still, he knew that this was the only way. Emily had to be exposed, no matter the cost. David turned away from her, his gaze shifting back to Ethan. "I'm so sorry, son. I should have listened to you." Ethan shook his head, his voice barely audible as he spoke. "It's not your fault, Dad. I just didn't want you to get hurt." As the tension in the room grew, Emily's anger became more apparent. She clenched her fists, her breath shallow and quick, and her eyes narrowed dangerously. "You don't understand, David," she spat. "This wasn't supposed to happen. You were supposed to be mine." The venom in her words made Ethan's skin crawl. He realized then that he had only scratched the surface of the lies Emily had woven around his father. The wedding, the charm, the love she had shown. None of it had been real. Emily was after something far darker, and David had been her target all along. As the guests continued to whisper, some now looking to leave, others unsure of how to process the scene unfolding before them, David made a decision. "I don't want to hear another word from you, Emily. Get out." His voice was firm, no longer the loving, trusting man he had been only moments before. "I've heard enough. I've seen enough. You're done." Emily's face twisted in fury, but her mask of control cracked even further. She shot a final, venomous glare at David, then turned and stormed out of the chapel, her heels clicking angrily against the floor. David stood motionless for a long moment, his eyes focused on the door through which Emily had exited, as though he could still see her there. The silence in the room was deafening, but it was only then that Ethan realized how much he had feared this moment. His father's love for Emily had been so strong, so all-consuming. The pain of losing her must have been crushing. But now there was only one truth. Emily was gone, and David was free. David turned to Ethan, his eyes filled with a mixture of emotions. Regret, pain, relief. "Thank you, Ethan," he said softly. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't said something. I've been so blind." Ethan wiped his eyes, trying to fight back the tears. "I just wanted you to be safe, Dad." David reached out, pulling Ethan into a tight embrace. "You saved me, son. You saved both of us." The words hung in the air between them, and in that moment, Ethan felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had done the right thing. It had been hard, it had hurt, but it was the only way to protect his father. The room began to clear as the guests slowly filed out, leaving David and Ethan standing at the front of the chapel, surrounded by the remnants of what should have been a joyous occasion. But for both of them, this wasn't the end, it was a new beginning. As they walked out of the chapel together, hand in hand, David spoke again, his voice more determined than ever. "We'll get through this, Ethan. Together." And with that, they left the chapel behind, stepping into a new chapter of their lives. One where love, trust, and family would guide them, no matter what came next. The next few days were a blur of emotion. Ethan watched his father struggle with the weight of the truth he had uncovered. David had always been the strong one, the rock that Ethan could lean on. But now, his father seemed smaller, vulnerable, and shaken by the betrayal. Emily had taken so much from him, not just his trust, but his sense of self. Ethan could see the raw hurt in his father's eyes, and it broke his heart to watch him suffer. David spent most of his days in silence, retreating into his thoughts. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt empty. Ethan tried to comfort his father, but he could see that David was lost in his own grief. There were no words that could undo the pain, no actions that could erase the hurt Emily had caused. One evening, as they sat at the dinner table, Ethan broke the silence. "Dad, are you okay?" David looked up from his plate, his eyes tired. He gave a weak smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'll be fine, buddy. Just trying to figure things out." Ethan knew it wasn't that simple. The man he had always looked up to, the man who had been his protector, was now struggling to find his way in a world that had been turned upside down. And Emily's betrayal had left deep scars, ones that wouldn't heal easily. For the next few days, David avoided talking about the wedding, about Emily, about what had happened. He couldn't face it. Every time he did, the pain of the truth resurfaced, and the wound in his heart felt deeper. Ethan wanted to help, but he didn't know how. It wasn't until David went through the motions of canceling the wedding, returning the gifts, and contacting the authorities about the insurance policy, that the gravity of the situation truly hit home. Emily had been planning this for months, maybe even longer, and it wasn't just a matter of money, it was about control, manipulation, and cruelty. Ethan's anger toward Emily grew with each passing day. He had never wanted to expose her to his father, but it was the only way to keep him safe. And now, even though Emily was gone from their lives, her actions still lingered like a dark cloud hanging over them. One afternoon, David called Ethan into the living room. He was sitting on the couch, staring at the photos of their family that lined the walls. Ethan sat beside him, waiting for his father to speak. David finally looked at him, his voice soft. I don't know what to say, Ethan. I failed you. I didn't see what was right in front of me. I trusted her, and I couldn't see that she wasn't who she said she was. Ethan shook his head, putting a hand on his father's arm. You didn't fail me, Dad. You were just in love. It's not your fault. David smiled faintly, his eyes filled with regret. Maybe, but I should have protected you. I should have listened when you told me something was wrong. It's okay, Dad, Ethan said softly. You weren't the only one fooled. I should have said something sooner too, but I was scared. I didn't want to hurt you. David reached out and pulled Ethan into a hug, holding him close. I'm so proud of you, Ethan. You saved me even when I couldn't see the truth. I don't know what I would have done without you. Ethan closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of his father's embrace. It wasn't a perfect moment, but it was real. It was raw, and it was exactly what they both needed. The pain of the betrayal wouldn't disappear overnight, but it was a start, a step toward healing. And for the first time in days, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope. He had saved his father from Emily, and he had saved their family from a life of deception and danger. David pulled away, his eyes red but determined. We'll get through this, Ethan. Together. Ethan nodded, the weight on his shoulders lighter now. He had done the right thing, and while the road ahead would be difficult, he knew that they would face it together, side by side. The bond between father and son had always been unbreakable, and now it was stronger than ever. The house might have been quieter, the wounds still fresh, but Ethan knew one thing for sure: he wasn't alone. And as long as they had each other, they would rebuild, stronger and more united than ever before. As the days went by, Ethan could sense that something had shifted. The world around him had become quieter, more subdued, but Emily's presence still loomed large in his mind. Despite the chaos she had left behind, she wasn't finished. Ethan could feel it. He knew she wasn't going to just walk away. The day after the wedding, after everything had unraveled, Ethan was shocked when he received a phone call. It was from an unknown number, but the voice on the other end was unmistakable. Ethan, Emily's voice rang through the line, cold and calculated. You think you've won, don't you? Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He glanced over at his father, who was in the other room, trying to make sense of the mess Emily had left behind. Ethan stepped into the hallway, away from David's earshot. What do you want, Emily? He demanded, trying to keep his voice steady despite the flood of emotions rushing through him. Emily chuckled darkly. What I want? You've already ruined everything, Ethan. But this isn't over. I won't let you get away with this. Ethan felt a chill crawl up his spine. What do you mean? It's over. You're done. Oh, it's far from over, Emily spat. You think your father will protect you forever? You think I'll let you ruin my plans just like that? You're a child, Ethan. You can't stop me. Ethan clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. I already did. For a brief moment, there was silence on the other end of the line. Then, Emily's voice came through, cold and bitter. You don't know who you're dealing with, Ethan. I've always known how to play the game. You think I'm going to let a little boy like you destroy everything I've worked for? You're wrong. You haven't seen the last of me. The call ended abruptly, leaving Ethan standing in the hallway, his heart racing. He didn't want to tell his father about the call, not yet. He wasn't sure if he should. He didn't want to cause his dad any more pain, but he knew that Emily wouldn't back down. The next few days were tense. David tried to focus on moving forward, on rebuilding the pieces of his life that Emily had shattered. But Ethan could see that his father was still deeply shaken. Even though he had been freed from Emily's manipulation, David couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. He had trusted her, loved her, and now she had turned everything into a nightmare. Ethan's worry grew with each passing day. The call from Emily was just the beginning. She had a plan, and whatever it was, it wouldn't be pretty. He couldn't afford to ignore her threat. One evening, David came to Ethan, his expression somber. Ethan, I need to talk to you about something. Ethan nodded, sitting down beside his father. What is it, Dad? David sighed heavily, rubbing his hands over his face. I've been thinking about everything that happened with Emily, and I can't stop feeling like I missed something. Like I should have seen it, you know? Ethan placed a hand on his father's arm, trying to offer some comfort. Dad, you couldn't have known. She fooled us both. But you're not alone in this. I'm here, and we'll get through it together. David smiled faintly, his eyes weary but filled with gratitude. I don't know what I would have done without you, Ethan. You were the one who saw through her. You saved me. Ethan felt a swell of pride in his chest, but it was mixed with the heavy knowledge of what was still to come. Emily wasn't done with them, and he had no idea what lengths she would go to in order to get what she wanted. The next morning, Ethan found an envelope at the door. It was addressed to his father, but it wasn't from anyone he recognized. His heart sank as he tore open the envelope and found a letter inside. It was a threat. The letter was simple, but the message was clear. You haven't seen the last of me. I always get what I want. Don't think you're safe. You will regret crossing me. Ethan felt his stomach twist with dread. Emily was making her move. She was playing a dangerous game, and it wasn't just about revenge. Ethan knew that she would stop at nothing to regain control of the life she had lost. He couldn't allow that to happen. He couldn't let his father suffer any longer. Ethan? David called from the other room, his voice filled with concern. What's wrong? Ethan took a deep breath and walked into the living room, the letter clenched tightly in his hand. He could feel the weight of the truth pressing down on him. Dad, we need to talk. The room felt suffocating as Ethan handed the letter to his father, his heart hammering in his chest. David's eyes scanned the note, his expression faltering as he read the cold, menacing words. Ethan watched his father's face shift from confusion to alarm, and his stomach twisted with the heavy realization that Emily's threat was real. David stood frozen for a moment, the letter crumpled in his hand. This is serious, he murmured, his voice low and filled with disbelief. Ethan nodded grimly. She's not done. She's gonna keep coming after us. Dad, I don't know what she's planning, but I know she's dangerous. David's jaw tightened, his expression hardening. We have to make sure she can't hurt us anymore. Without hesitation, David pulled out his phone and dialed the police. Ethan watched as his father's hands shook ever so slightly, a stark reminder of how deeply the betrayal had affected him. Despite the calm tone David tried to maintain, Ethan could see the fear in his eyes, the fear of losing everything again. The police arrived within the hour, 2 officers stepping into the house, their presence an undeniable reminder of how serious the situation had become. David and Ethan led them into the living room, where they explained the situation, the deception, the wedding, the insurance policy, and now the letter. Officer Johnson, the lead detective, listened intently as they spoke, taking notes and asking pertinent questions. We'll need to take this letter as evidence, Officer Johnson said, his voice firm. And we'll start an investigation into her whereabouts. We'll issue a warrant for her arrest if we can gather enough evidence, but we'll need to move quickly. Ethan felt a wave of relief wash over him as the officers assured them that they would take action. Emily was not going to get away with this. The police were taking the threat seriously, and they would do whatever it took to protect them. Still, a small part of Ethan's mind remained unsettled. He couldn't shake the feeling that Emily wouldn't go down without a fight. She had already proven that she was capable of manipulation and deceit, and he knew that her anger would drive her to do anything to get what she wanted. Over the next few days, the police continued their investigation, gathering evidence and following leads. Emily's name was plastered across missing person reports, and the authorities issued an APB, an all-points bulletin, alerting every local law enforcement agency to be on the lookout for her. But even with all their efforts, there was no sign of Emily. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. David remained restless, pacing the house, always checking his phone, waiting for news. Ethan stayed close to his father, trying to keep him calm, but there was an unspoken tension in the air. Emily was still out there, and no matter how much they wanted to believe she was gone, they both knew better. One afternoon, the phone rang. David rushed to answer it, his voice tense. Hello? Ethan stood nearby, watching his father's face change as he listened. A moment later, David hung up the phone, his eyes wide with shock. "They found her," David said, his voice thick with disbelief. "They found Emily." Ethan's heart raced. "Where is she?" "Is she not arrested?" David interrupted. "She's dead." Ethan's world seemed to stop in that instant. He stared at his father, unsure of how to process the words. "Dead? What happened?" David shook his head, his eyes clouded with confusion. "The police just found her body. She was found in a motel room outside of Vegas. No signs of foul play, just gone." Ethan's mind reeled. The woman who had come so close to destroying their lives was now dead. The chaos, the manipulation, the fear, it was all over. But the relief that should have washed over him felt hollow. Emily's death would never bring back the peace they had lost. David sat down heavily on the couch, his face pale. I don't know what to feel, Ethan. She's gone. But it doesn't make anything easier. I don't know how to deal with this." Ethan sat beside him, placing a hand on his father's shoulder. "I'm sorry, Dad. I know it's a lot to take in. But we're going to be okay. She can't hurt us anymore." David nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to forget everything she did. But I do know that I've got you, Ethan. And that's all that matters now." For the first time in days, Ethan saw a glimmer of hope in his father's eyes. The storm they had weathered together had passed, and though the wounds would take time to heal, they had come through stronger than ever. The police would continue their investigation, but the danger Emily had posed was over. She had paid the ultimate price for her deception, and now, David and Ethan could finally begin to rebuild their lives. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be more challenges ahead. But with each other by their side, they knew they could face anything. As the days turned into weeks, David and Ethan found solace in each other's company. They spent more time together, enjoying simple moments that had once seemed so insignificant. And though the scars from Emily's betrayal would never completely fade, they knew that together, they could move forward, stronger, wiser, and unshaken by the darkness that had threatened to tear them apart. The dust had settled. The chaos, the uncertainty, and the fear had all but subsided. But even though Emily was no longer a threat, the consequences of her manipulation lingered in the corners of David and Ethan's lives. The wedding that was supposed to unite them had instead become the catalyst for one of the most painful chapters of their lives. But as the weeks passed, the weight of the past began to lighten, and something new emerged. A deeper understanding between father and son. David tried to return to normalcy, though it wasn't easy. The idea of marrying again, of trusting someone with his heart, felt impossible after what he had been through. Emily had fooled him so thoroughly that it left a mark on his soul, one that would take time to heal. He focused on his work, trying to distract himself from the memories of their life together. But there were still moments when the grief of betrayal would overwhelm him. Ethan, on the other hand, was determined to keep moving forward. He had always been the quieter one, the observer, but after everything that had happened, he realized how much his father had relied on him. It wasn't just about being a son anymore. It was about being a partner, someone who could share the burden of loss and help carry the weight of the future. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset, David broke the silence. "You know, Ethan," he began, his voice soft but filled with thought, "I don't know how I would have gotten through this without you. You were my rock when I couldn't see straight." Ethan shifted, his heart swelling at the words. "I just did what I had to, Dad. You were hurting, and I couldn't just stand by and watch it happen." David smiled faintly, his eyes searching the horizon as if trying to make sense of everything. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive myself for not seeing it sooner, for trusting her when I should have trusted you. But I do know one thing for sure. You're the most important thing in my life. I'm never going to let anyone hurt you again." Ethan's eyes met his father's, and he could see the sincerity in his gaze. It was a look that made him believe that, no matter how dark things had gotten, they had found their way back to each other. The bond they shared had always been strong, but now it was unbreakable. The weeks following Emily's death and the revelation of her deception were filled with adjustments. Ethan started spending more time with his father, talking more openly about his feelings, something they had never done much before. David, in turn, started to open up as well, sharing his own fears and doubts, things he had kept buried for years. The silence between them had always been comfortable, but now, the quiet was filled with understanding and compassion. They began to rebuild. David focused on his career, making changes in his personal life that would allow him to heal at his own pace. Ethan started to excel in school again, the weight of his fears lightening as he realized that his family was safe. Together, they tackled life's challenges, finding strength in the unspoken promise they had made to each other. They would never let anything tear them apart. One weekend, David suggested they take a trip together, just the two of them. "Let's get away for a bit," he said, a hopeful tone in his voice. "No distractions, just us. We could use a break." Ethan agreed without hesitation. They drove out to a quiet lake a few hours from home, a peaceful place that offered both of them the respite they needed. There, by the water, they hiked, fished, and shared stories. It was a chance for them to reconnect, not just as father and son, but as two people who had been through the storm and come out the other side stronger. During the trip, Ethan asked something he hadn't yet dared to voice. "Dad, do you think you'll ever date again?" David paused, looking out at the water before answering. "I don't know. Right now, I'm just focused on you. I want to make sure we're both okay, and I'm not sure I'm ready for anything else. But maybe one day." Ethan nodded, understanding more than he had expected. He didn't want his father to rush into anything, especially after everything he had been through. It was a difficult question, one that had been on both of their minds for some time, but the answer felt right for them both. As they walked back to the cabin, the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple. It was a quiet, peaceful moment, the kind of moment they had missed during the chaos of the past few months. "I think we're going to be okay," David said quietly, glancing at his son. "We've been through hell, but we're still standing, and that's what matters." Ethan smiled, the weight in his chest lifting. "Yeah, we are." As they drove back home, Ethan realized that, despite everything they had lost, they had gained something more important: resilience, trust, and an unwavering bond. They had faced the storm together, and in doing so, they had learned that the strongest relationships are forged in the fires of hardship. Life would continue to throw challenges their way, but for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt ready to face whatever came next, knowing that with his father by his side, they could overcome anything. Months passed, and life began to find a semblance of normalcy for David and Ethan. The aftermath of Emily's deceit had left deep scars, but they were healing slowly but surely. The betrayal still lingered in the background, but it no longer controlled their lives. The worst seemed to be over, but there was a nagging feeling in the back of Ethan's mind, a sense of unease that refused to dissipate. Emily might have disappeared, but she hadn't been caught. The question remained, was she truly gone? One crisp autumn morning, Ethan woke to the sound of his father's voice, tense and urgent, calling him downstairs. He quickly made his way to the living room, finding David with a phone in hand, his face pale and his brow furrowed. "What's wrong, Dad?" Ethan asked, his voice filled with concern. David looked up, his expression troubled. "Ethan, you need to sit down for a moment." Ethan did as he was told, his heart sinking in his chest. "What's going on?" David took a deep breath, the weight of the situation heavy in his voice. "The police just called. They found Emily's body, but there's something we didn't know. She's been dead for weeks." Ethan's stomach churned. "What do you mean?" David leaned forward, his eyes darkened with concern. "She wasn't just running away, Ethan. Emily had been hiding. She faked her own death to escape from everyone, including the law. The whole thing was a setup." Ethan couldn't process the words at first. His mind was reeling. But if she was dead, why didn't anyone find out sooner? David shook his head, his face grim. "It was all part of her plan, son. Emily was meticulous. She knew how to cover her tracks, and she had help. Mark, the man she had been working with, wasn't just a wedding planner. He was part of her scheme to disappear." But now, it seems that she didn't just want to run from the law. She was hiding from something much bigger. Ethan's mind raced. He couldn't shake the feeling that the story wasn't over yet. Emily's death had been a mystery, but now there was even more to it. Why had she faked her own death? Why had she gone to such extreme lengths to disappear? The police, though initially relieved to have found her, were now more uncertain than ever. They had no answers to explain why she had staged her own death or what had truly happened. Emily had left a web of lies so tangled that even the authorities couldn't untangle it. David, still processing the news, rubbed his temples. I don't know what to think anymore. Emily was always 2 steps ahead of us. She controlled everything and I was blind to it. Now, it seems like even in death, she's managed to manipulate us. Ethan sat quietly watching his father. The confusion, the pain, it was all still there, and it was clear that David was far from healed. He had lost more than just trust in Emily. He had lost his sense of certainty in the world, in people, and in love. As the days went on, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something left unfinished. Emily's escape, her manipulation, and the aftermath of her life and death were leaving unanswered questions. And Ethan was determined to uncover the truth. The police kept investigating, but they were no closer to understanding what had truly happened. They had found Emily's remains in a deserted motel outside of Las Vegas, but there were no signs of foul play, just the eerie sense that Emily had planned everything down to the smallest detail. Weeks passed, and with each update from the authorities, the mystery deepened. Why had Emily staged her death and who had helped her? Ethan's curiosity grew, and despite his father's reluctance to revisit the past, he knew he had to find the answers. One evening, while David was at work, Ethan made a decision. He would go back to the motel where Emily had been found. It was a risk, but he couldn't shake the need to uncover the truth. He had to know everything. He couldn't let Emily's story be buried with her. When he arrived at the location, the motel was abandoned, its windows boarded up, and the air thick with neglect. But as he walked through the desolate grounds, something caught his eye. The door to one of the rooms was ajar, as though someone had recently been there. His heart raced as he approached, every step filled with uncertainty. Inside the room, the dust was thick, but there were signs that someone had been there recently. A few scattered papers on a table, an old, cracked phone discarded on the floor. It was clear that Emily had left a trail, a final message, a warning, something. Ethan carefully sifted through the papers, his fingers trembling. As he read through the notes, he found something shocking. A letter addressed to someone named Sarah. The handwriting was familiar, but it wasn't Emily's. It was Mark's. The contents of the letter were chilling. It's done. Emily's plan is in motion. If anything goes wrong, we know what to do. The insurance will come through, and we'll be able to disappear. It's a matter of time before David is out of the picture. The final stage begins now. Ethan's heart pounded as he read the letter over and over again. Mark wasn't just an accomplice, he was part of a much larger scheme. And Emily had known this entire time. The insurance policy, the wedding, the manipulation, it had all been part of something even more sinister. Ethan quickly pocketed the letter and left the room, his mind racing with new questions. Who was Sarah? What was the final stage of their plan? And how deep did this conspiracy go? As Ethan returned home, his mind was filled with the pieces of a puzzle that were finally starting to make sense. Emily's death hadn't been the end. It had been the beginning of a much larger revelation, one that would change everything for David, Ethan, and anyone who had ever been connected to her web of lies. The letter Ethan had found in the abandoned motel room weighed heavily in his pocket as he returned home. His mind was racing with questions and pieces of a larger puzzle that still didn't fit. Who was Sarah? What was this final stage Emily and Mark had been talking about? And why had they gone to such lengths to deceive everyone around them? Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were only scratching the surface of something much more dangerous. But as he walked through the front door, he took a deep breath, reminding himself that he didn't have to solve it all right now. For once, he needed to focus on his father. David was sitting on the couch when Ethan returned, looking up with a weary smile. Hey, buddy, what's on your mind? Ethan hesitated for a moment, then decided to keep the new developments to himself. For now. His father had been through so much, and he didn't want to pile more on him. He tucked the letter into his jacket pocket, vowing to look into it further on his own. For now, they needed a break. Peace, even if it was temporary. "I was just thinking about that camping trip we took last month," Ethan said, sitting down beside his father. "You know, it was nice to just get away and spend time together." David smiled faintly, his eyes softening. "Yeah, I needed that. We both did. It's been a hell of a ride." Ethan nodded, looking out the window, where the last rays of the sun were dipping below the horizon. It was a beautiful evening, quiet, still, and comforting. In that moment, everything felt more manageable, more like it was supposed to be. He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring or how long it would take to uncover all the secrets left behind by Emily and Mark. But he knew one thing. He had his father, and they were stronger together. The weeks following Emily's death brought a sense of routine, a return to normal life, at least for David. He focused on his work, rebuilding his career, and finding his footing after the chaos. Ethan threw himself into his studies, spending more time with his friends and finding comfort in the things that had once brought him peace. But in the back of his mind, he kept wondering about Sarah and the final stage that had been mentioned in Mark's letter. It was like an itch he couldn't scratch, a nagging feeling that he wasn't quite done with this chapter of his life. Ethan knew that Emily and Mark had been more dangerous than anyone had realized, and he couldn't allow their twisted plans to stay buried. But he also knew that his father was still healing, still fragile, and the last thing he wanted was to drag him back into the chaos. So Ethan decided to wait. He would investigate further, but carefully, strategically. He had to protect his father, no matter what. One evening, a few weeks after the trip, as David sat in his study, Ethan quietly took the letter from his jacket and sat down at the kitchen table. He began to read through it again, his eyes scanning for any clue, any detail he might have missed. The mention of Sarah stuck with him. He had no idea who she was, but the fact that Mark had been in touch with her suggested that she was important to the larger plot. The letter wasn't just a confession. It was a blueprint for something. Ethan could feel it. He could sense that Emily and Mark had been playing a much larger game than anyone realized. Their actions weren't just about money or revenge. They were about control. They had been manipulating everything, pulling strings, and now that they were out of the picture, someone else would need to fill the void. Ethan closed his eyes, his mind racing with possibilities. He couldn't leave things unfinished. He had to protect his father, even if it meant putting himself in danger. He reached for the phone and made a call to the one person he trusted most, Officer Johnson. The police detective had been a constant presence in their lives since Emily's death, and Ethan knew that if anyone could help him get to the bottom of this, it was him. The investigation into Emily's death had been quiet, but there was more to it. There had to be. "Officer Johnson, it's Ethan Matthews," he said, his voice steady. "I think I've found something important. Something I need you to look into." The detective's voice crackled through the line. "What is it, Ethan?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, then decided to share everything. What he'd found at the motel, the letter, and his suspicions about Sarah. "I don't know what it means yet, but I think Emily and Mark had bigger plans than we thought, and there's someone named Sarah involved. I need your help to figure out who she is and what they were planning." Officer Johnson was silent for a moment, but then he responded. "I'll get on it right away. Don't worry, Ethan. We'll find out what happened, and we'll make sure you and your father are safe." Ethan felt a sense of relief wash over him. This wasn't the end of their story, it was just another chapter. But with Officer Johnson's help, he was confident they would uncover the rest of the truth. As the evening settled into night, Ethan sat back in his chair, feeling the weight of the world shift just a little. They weren't done yet, but they would be. One step at a time, they would uncover every last secret and put the past behind them. For David, for himself, for their future. The storm had passed, but the work of rebuilding had only just begun. And this time, with the strength of the bond between father and son, they knew they could handle whatever came next.